Some symptoms are obvious, but there are some that are often quieter. They all live in the background. They make you wonder if it's only you that deals with them. So, if you experience things like emotional sensitivity, social overload, digestive issues, temperature shifts, and identity conflicts, and if you questioned if they're a part of fibro, they can be. Today, we are going to discuss some symptoms that are quieter and why they happen. Welcome to Holistic Fibromyalgia Journeys. I'm glad you're here and I hope you feel comfortable. Have you ever noticed sometimes that you feel like your emotions shift a lot? Whether it be going from all of a minute you're confident about one thing to all of a sudden feeling like you're losing everything? It's where you feel like you're constantly being pushed down and you're forced to carry on even though you don't feel like you can't. Do you feel like everything you try to do only makes you feel like you should be ashamed of the fact you're not doing more? I know I stay quite contained, but when I was in the beginning, I wasn't able to do it a lot. And I was always ashamed because my personality seemed to shift. However, these emotional sensitivities are not about weakness. What they're about is overload in your nervous system because you're constantly stuck in fight or flight. It's also about capacity because the human brain can only deal with so much. Common ones that people with fibromyalgia deal with is IBS-C or IBS-D. I've dealt with both. Another one is nausea. Over the years, I've gone to nutritionists because I couldn't figure out why so many things were causing nausea, whether it be from scent or taste. I was thinking I was doing so many things wrong in trying to make it so I would eat more. And in fact, it was all part of my illness. It is the changes in my gut. And let me tell you, that was such a relief because I'd rather know and I can work with it without blaming myself by saying, oh, I'm just being overly sensitive. And it also gave me a pathway to try and figure out what works, what doesn't, and what would allow me to at least live mostly a normal life when it came to food. I still trying to control all the different things, but it honestly isn't just discipline. It's also about dealing with the regulation of your system to try and mitigate the issues. Maybe you find out your tolerances to certain foods grew worse, and so you just need to tweak your diet and find the things that trigger, which then remove from your diet. Temperature dysregulation is not talked about, whether you be more sensitive to cold, hot. And then you also got to consider the vast majority of the people that diagnose with fibromyalgia are women, and they generally tend to be older, or at least that is what it was originally assumed. It is now changing, but we're dealing with menopause as well. It's about your nervous system, and it's not able to regulate your temperature as well as it should, because it is dealing with too much stimulus. This leads to instability in temperature. It's not that you can control the temperature because sometimes your body needs different temperatures. This is not about a preference. What this is about is your system trying to regulate around overload due to the fight or flight symptoms. Now, the next one ties in a little bit with some of the stuff that was mentioned in my last episode, which is on some of the common sensory overload. This also comes into play in social situations. Whether you feel shame because you've gained weight, shame because you don't move the way you do. Sometimes it's about how each room, everybody around you just seems louder and you feel like you're overwhelmed. It makes you less tolerant to the extra stimulus. There's also the fact that your energy drains so fast. And when you're in social situations, it seems to drain even faster because you're trying so hard to control so many different things that it actually makes the matter worse. It gets to the point where some rooms, they feel less like a social gathering into more of an endurance training event. It's not about being antisocial. It's about being socially overloaded. Probably the most prevalent, and what I'm going to break down into 3 different episodes later on. I'm just going to gloss over them right now. It is the mixture of identity, work, and disability. All 3 of them mean things in our cultures. All adults are taught that they need to work, need to be productive, and they need to be social, otherwise they're not worth anything. When you get diagnosed with fibromyalgia, you lose that work identity. Or you get like me and you try and work until such time as your illness has gotten so bad that you become a danger to others. And in that, you lose that work identity. You lose the identity you've spent most of your life building. That is a shock to the system. That is such an overwhelming sense of loss that it's the same thing as losing a parent, losing a spouse. Because in some ways it's even worse because it's losing yourself. It's losing what you thought you were. And that's extremely dangerous. It is hazardous to your health, to your mental well-being, and to your self-worth and self-esteem. When I realized that I was driving to work so buried in the cognitive fog due to what I was taking, that I was trying to drive in a very hazardous manner. And I finally learned that I can't do that. And it sent me into a spiral for years. It destabilizes everything you think you are, everything you thought you were, and everything you thought you were going to be. However, we're also taught that disability is something we don't want. We don't want to accept that we have one. It's one thing if you're paralyzed because of an accident. You have something more concrete to blame it on. With fibro, you don't. You just think you got to push harder, that you can overcome it just by following some of the advice that says, oh, you just got to push through it. Oh, you just got to deal with it. Oh, you're just catastrophizing. And that right there is part of the problem. And it's part of what makes your symptoms worse. What you really need to work on, it's not to be who you were. It's about figuring out how to be what you want to be in a way that your body can sustain. And yes, that sometimes may change what you plan to do with your life. It may change how you can contribute. But that doesn't mean you can't contribute in a meaningful way, just in a different manner. It's not about being a failure. It's about transitioning into a new form of lifestyle. We think with every time we start putting more blame on ourselves, more and more self-doubt, and that's when we actually start adding more stress to ourselves. And as the cycle I've mentioned prior, with self-doubt comes increased stress. With increased stress, they increase more symptoms. More symptoms equal more stress. And the vicious cycle continues, each time layering on top of the other. By naming and understanding the different symptoms, that actually can reduce the amount of shame you feel if you allow it. And that's the key point. Sometimes you've got to accept the fact that you were just human. And if you can't accept that, you're not going to be able to get the fibro to at least a tolerable level. By naming your symptoms, by becoming self-aware, that reduces the shame, which if used cumulatively can actually reduce some of the symptoms. So maybe you can find ways to contribute in ways you really want to do, maybe follow some of your dreams, maybe find some way of earning income that you think will help you and work within your disability. This reduces some of the shame you feel, and all of this really adds up. If this conversation feels like it resonates with you, especially about some of the quieter parts of fibromyalgia, you're welcome to subscribe. I share weekly reflections on some of my journey, on ways to practically support your body instead of fighting against it. I would also love to hear in comments about these quieter symptoms that you experience, but you haven't known to name. A single word would do. It means you can share with others that maybe you're not the only one that deals with this. And in that, it gives you a sense of belonging. This community that I'm building is meant to give us the thought process that we're not alone. It is to help us understand that there are many other people dealing with fibro and that these symptoms are not in isolation. They're shared, even if it's online, because there is a world out there with so many people that deal with these. And coping strategies are probably the best way to try and at least get it under control. You don't have to navigate this illness alone. Thank you for being here.